I think, is this the third one this year? Was it the fourth?
Third webinar this year.
Yeah, third webinar this year. So yeah, we're doing 10 webinars this year. These are the relational activism webinars. And we've responded to feedback, had a little think together ourselves as well at the start of the year. And we wanted to put together some conversations that we feel and people in our collective feel are important. And this is a topic that's especially close to our hearts because it's about parent advocacy. And the title is Weighing the Evidence, which is, I don't know, there's something about that phrase that I like. I don't know what it is. But and we're really pleased to have Clive Diaz, Dr. Clive Diaz, and Sammi Fitz-Symonds with us, returning to this webinar to talk to us about their ongoing research around peer parental advocacy. And we've got a nice relationship with them, and we've worked really well with them over a period of time in Camden, and we're really pleased that they're able to update us on that work. And you've been working closely with them as well over time, Rich. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Clive and I and Sammi was involved in looking at a kind of literature review of parental advocacy, and then also since then they've gone on to look at parental advocacy specifically in Camden. So it's nice because we've got a mix of what we found kind of nationally and internationally, and then also some more recent research looking specifically at what's been undertaken in Camden. So hopefully there'll be lots of rich learning with some practical tips and ideas for how to take some of this stuff forward and what you might want to think about.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's a Gregory Bateson phrase about the rigor. You need rigor and you need imagination, and it's been really good to have that rigor and that structure of the research and the approach that Sammi and Clive bring to that. We're going to be monitoring looking at the chat. So, like, any questions you've got or points you want to make, do put them in the chat, and then we can bring those to Clive and Sammi as they present. We got a little starter for you, and we've got Carmen actually on the screen at the moment. And I don't know, does anybody notice something about, you probably can't spot it, but it's something which I quite like, a little symmetry in the way that the context for me and Carmen at the moment, because I'm sitting here at home and Carmen's actually in the Camden office at the moment. And do you want to explain who you are, Carmen? And
can you hear me?
Making that point. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I thought my mic was mute. Anyway, hello everyone, and I'm Carmen. So I'm one of the parent advocates in Camden. So I'm today in the Camden office, and I got some good news and update want to share with everyone. And so one of the parents I'm working with, that the case is going from CP down to child in need. So which is, I'm very happy for that, especially the case was when I worked with the parents, and she had some issue with her social worker, and she wasn't very happy. But after I worked with her, and she took my advice, and she showed her strength, and also be proactive and working with the social worker and make change, and it shows that everyone and the professional can see the change in her attitude and how she worked with everybody. And so it is really pleased that she can bravely share her views and work with the social worker and have a better outcome today. Other good news is in Camden, so we're going to have another cohort of parents going to have the training on June. So we will have 4 more parents to get trained. So it is really encouraging because in Camden, we start to get more referrals from social worker, and we have more people and to get trained. And so the parent advocacy service in Camden, this makes me very happy. I'm really pleased to see this positive development. Yeah, so that's my update. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really nice, Carmen. And before we leave you there, and I'm still conscious that you're there in the office putting in a shift, and I'm at home, which is like, there's a nice irony about that actually. But what you I can see that you're happy today with what's happened and that change and that success for the parent that you're supporting. And I mean, how did you come to the work of being a parent advocate? Would you be able to tell us about that?
So myself, I have the experience, the lived experience of the CP process. So it was 10 years, about 10, 11 years ago. So then I have no one to help me at that time. And my son was removed for 6 months. So, and I have to do everything to going through the process myself, to navigate myself. It was quite difficult. And then afterwards, I got my son back, and I have all the support that I had from Camden. And then I start to join the Family Advisory Board that team created in 2014. So then I start to learn more about social work and to participate in many activities that we co-create in Camden. And then linked to 2016 to 2018, those time we have a research commissioned by the Camden Safeguarding Board and now Camden Safeguarding Partnership in Camden, that this Camden conversation. So the recommendation is that from parents and the professionals that we agree that we need the parent advocates, this role, to help to make change to a better service in child protection process. So then I work with the manager of the Child Protection Conference chairs we develop the policies and how to develop this role. And then we also got trained as a parent advocate still during the pandemic time. But then, so I think last July, we start to launch our service. But before that, we already have this service, but it's not with people with lived experience. But since last July, we added with parent advocates with lived experience. So until now, and we are getting more and more people to get trained. So that is my journey.
Thank you. And is that the lanyard you've got around your neck there?
Yeah.
There you are. That's your Camden, which is nice. Yeah. We saw we were watching that webinar with Nora Bateson at the weekend, weren't we, on Sunday? And she was talking about that phrase, the difference that makes the difference. What is the difference that makes the difference? And she was saying, like, if you're sitting there with a cup of tea or coffee, how do you really understand and understand the difference? How is my coffee cup different to yours? And you only really know by touching, by connecting, by reaching out, and to see you there in the office, achieving success with that parent, and getting involved, connecting, is really very moving, actually. And I want to applaud you for that, Carmen. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a remarkable turnaround, I think, Carmen, to go from being on the receiving end, and not just like on the staff end of receiving services in terms of child protection and care proceedings, and now to find yourself, you know, later in the Camden office, advocating for collaboration between parents and social workers, when very easily you could have remained resentful and angry and disappointed and upset, and you've been able to transform. I remember in David Tobis's book around, is it From Pariahs to Parents?
From Pariahs to Partners, yeah.
Pariahs to Partners. And one of the things he talks about in that book is that initially when parents start to get involved, there is a lot of anger and there is a lot of hurt and there is a lot of disappointment. And so when we're looking at parental advocacy, that's just something for us to consider, and not to use that as a reason to not engage in a dialogue, because that can actually be a fuel for the parent if they can transform some of that anger and that disappointment into a more productive and positive force for good. And yeah, so it's really Carmen, to listen to your story and to see where you're at. So thank you.
And
Thank you.
And at this juncture, Rich, shall we bring in Clive and Sammi?
Yeah, let's go for it. I have a slight problem of not being able to see my mouse.
Hi.
There we go.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, that
Hi,
was
Clive.
Hi, that was really powerful. Can you hear me okay, Carmen?
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Did you want to just kick us off, Clive? Now I've got.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So what we're going to be thinking about for the next 40 minutes or so is a study that a number of us did. Sammi played a key role, did a lot of the work in this study. I had a bit of involvement and Rich was involved. And in fact, David Tobis has co-authored a paper with us, which is good. And we hope to get that published soon. And of course, we worked with Tim and Carmen and lots of other really good people at Camden. And it was evaluation funded by the What Works Centre, looking at how the parent advocacy model was working in Camden. If we go on to the next slide. And I guess we know from so many studies over a very long period that parents find the child protection system, and particularly child protection conferences and the core groups, the meetings, very difficult to say the least, stigmatizing, authoritarian, oppressive. And I guess it's, you know, I was a social worker for quite a few years, and I chaired child protection conferences in 2 local authorities for a while. And I remember thinking at times, you know, this just all seems a bit wrong. And if I'm honest, I'd get rid of child protection conferences, apart from helping manage maybe some professionals, you know, concerns about risk. I'm not sure they really fulfill any meaningful function in terms of safeguarding children, and they definitely don't help parents participate meaningfully in decision making. But we are where we are, and the guidance, at least in England and indeed in Wales, insists that we have these meetings under certain circumstances, of which most of the people here will be aware, where the child is deemed to be at risk of significant harm. But we you know, there's a lot of evidence from the States in particular, which David Tobis and others have done, which has suggested that peer parental advocacy might be a sort of solution, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But if we go on to the next slide, I just want to give some background to some research I did a few years ago now in 2 local authorities in England. And what we did is we did interviews with 52 parents and 40 children in 2 local authorities in the southwest of England. And we wanted to understand, I mean, there have been other studies similar to this, but around that time there hadn't been many published. And we wanted to understand their experiences of child protection conferences of both parents and children, although what I'm going to focus on over the next couple of minutes is mainly parents' experiences, and also their views of social workers and what they'd like to be different. I mean, at this stage, parent advocacy didn't really exist. We did these interviews 7, 8 years ago, or they didn't exist in the authorities. I don't think they existed really anywhere in England at the time. But generally, someone's come off mute there. So generally, parents' experiences of child protection conferences was very negative. So it makes you feel like a school kid and inferior. One of the mothers said that we interviewed. I felt like I was in a corner. I was worn out. It was traumatic. 47 of the 52 parents we interviewed said they found these meetings very negative. And I think a key thing for me is we have the child protection conference to decide whether the child is going to partly to decide whether the child is going to be subject to a child protection plan in England and Wales. The point of that plan is to keep the child safe and hopefully to keep the child at home. And in most cases, children do stay at home when there's a child protection conference. There is a significant minority, around 20% statistically in England, that do go into care, but the majority stay at home. And it struck me for a long time that we have this meeting, which is supposed to improve things for the children and make things better for the family, ideally. And actually, the whole context of the meeting, the way it's held, the fact that there's a vote at the end of the meeting to decide whether the child should be made subject to a child protection plan is deemed to be at risk. It's only professionals who have a say in that vote. It just seems like it's not a productive way of building relationships, building trust between professionals and parents. It's my nightmare. My nightmare scenario is, I've got 2 young kids, is going to a child protection conference for my 2 children. I just can't think of many things worse. If we go on to the next slide. And what we know from parents' experiences of conferences is that, from these interviews at least, most parents didn't like so much personal information being shared, very intimate details going back a very long time. They felt a real sense of powerlessness in these meetings. And often they found out too late that they could bring someone. We're not talking here about a peer advocate or any kind of advocacy. We're thinking about a family member, a friend, to come and just sit alongside them, because you can have 10, 15, even 20 professionals in the room, and then one, maybe both parents, but not always. It's very intimidating for parents. And I think one of the great things about peer parental advocacy, where it has real benefits over, say, for want of a better word, professional parent advocacy, is that it helps redress the balance, that it's not all professionals in the room. It's trying to slightly redress the balance. It doesn't completely, but does start to go in the right direction. Most of the parents felt powerless in the meeting. They felt the reports were very shaming. There was lots of very intimate personal details shared about their personal lives, like sexual assault, sexual abuse they'd suffered maybe as children, shared with many people in the room, often that they'd never met before. I mean, it really is, a deeply shaming experience for many parents, and it's remarkable that we're still doing it really in 2023. The more I think about it, it's just sort of ridiculous. If we go on to the next slide. This is not a way to help, build up relationships, in my view. And lack of communication was a big issue. I mean, if you're starting on this footing, someone's coming in and telling you you're not very good at parenting, it's a very difficult relationship from day one, really. And there was a sense that a lot of, and I'm not blaming the social workers here, they'll have had overwhelming caseloads, too much work to do, but most parents didn't feel that social workers really listened to them and saw a constant change of social workers. And if anything, the turnover of social workers in most local authorities has got worse over the years. So in this study, in these 2 studies rather, what parents would like to be different is they'd like to have much more of a say about who attends the child protection conference and who doesn't. They'd like simpler, more straightforward language to be used in the reports rather than very sort of technical jargon used. They'd like the reports to be more recognizing strengths, less invasive and less disproportionate. That was their experience. And very basic request that the reports were shared in a timely way. I found in both the local authorities, and it happened the same when I was a chair, in the sense that the reports were sometimes shared on the day before, sometimes an hour before the conference. Now that there is something we know from research, and we'll move on to Richard shortly, talking about our review, because this is a small part of what we're thinking about today. But there has been research we know from statistics and from research that it tends to be children from the poorest percentile who are subject to a child protection plan. Okay, that if you're a child from the poorest of 10% of families, you're 12 times more likely to be on a child protection plan and in care than a child from the richest families. And I wonder, would we have these conferences in the way we have them, sharing the reports a few hours before the meeting, if this was a process that everyone went through? Yeah, I just don't think we would. And interestingly, I remember from practice, when you had a wealthy family would come to the meeting with a lawyer, either the reports would be provided in a very timely way, i.e. 2 or 3 days before, or the conference would be postponed. It's just not acceptable to come to write these reports and provide them an hour or two before the meeting. It's you know, I appreciate again why social workers do it. They're overwhelmed. They got court reports, they got other things to write, too much work, but it still doesn't make it acceptable, particularly from the parents and indeed the whole family's perspective. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide. Where are we? Okay, so what's peer parental advocacy? I think I'm going to pass on to Rich at this point. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll take over. Thanks for that, Clive. That was a really good summary of some of the issues around developing collaborative relationships with parents within a child protection context. And I think it's worth noting that this isn't a reflection on social workers' intention or their commitment, because I know I work in a local authority and social workers work. They're some of the hardest working people I know, and they work relentlessly hard under incredibly difficult conditions to try and develop these types of relationships. And so it's something about working within this system that makes it extremely difficult to cultivate relationships with parents. And I think that is always going to be difficult because we're a representative of a statutory agency. And so parents are often fearful of the kind of power that they perceive as bestowed upon us, because they think we can readily remove children much more than we can, but also because there is a legitimate fear that social work intervention can escalate and lead into us issuing care proceedings, for example. And what I like about parental peer advocacy is that it's got the potential to kind of bridge the gap between where social workers have to stand as statutory agents and where parents are. And it's worth noting that some of the challenges in building collaborative relationships have remained even in the context of more increasingly developed practice models. And so it's something about what's built into the system that that parental peer advocacy has the possibility to ameliorate or support. So I'm going to very briefly give a summary of parental advocacy. A form of advocacy, as Carmen was kind of mentioning at the beginning, where parents who themselves have had experience of the child protection system can help other parents who are involved to navigate it. And in addition, that they may also develop strategies to change the system. Camden Conversations is a really good example of that, and I'd highly recommend checking that out. Basically, there's 3 types of parental advocacy. There's case advocacy, program advocacy, and policy advocacy. A lot of what the research that Clive and Sammi are going to talk to later is looking more at case advocacy, but it's just worth noting the different strands and types of advocacy. So why do we even consider advocacy? As I mentioned a minute ago, I think there's something about it functioning as a bridge between where social workers are and where parents are. But there's also some really interesting quotes here. For example, Berwick and her colleagues talked about it as a new significant and evidence-based strategy for supporting families in their efforts to reunify and show an important promise. They talk about it as a new in 2011, but that's in the context of being in the USA, and I think they're a little bit further ahead than us in the UK. There's a quote there in the bottom left by Bridge Featherstone and her colleagues, which comes out of a book called The Social Model. And this is where I first learned about parental advocacy, actually. They talk about that parents have built up an unparalleled knowledge of the range of welfare systems and services, and that the skills and the knowledge held by families can be utilised through a process of co-production to arrive at transformative approaches that function at the levels of practice and service design. And then there's also just that one in the middle by David Tobis around, it's not solely a matter of justice or sympathy or a desire to be nice to parents, which is an ideological point of view that we can fight about, but as a critically important thing to do to help kids. And then also it's been recommended within the care review, both in the case for change and in the conclusion and the recommendations of the final report. So this is just a reflection on so child protection engagement. So this is the view of a social worker who is talking about the more that you can give power to parents, the more likely it is that they feel empowered to make the changes within their own life. So there's something about the intention of social workers that get thwarted as a result of acting as an agent of a statutory organisation. And so this really isn't about a criticism of social workers' intentions. Rather, it points to, even when we have the most committed and intended approach to building collaborative relationships, there's something about the way that the system operates that makes that very difficult. And so you could either blame and change the social worker, or you can think maybe there's something about the system and whether we can do something that compensates or ameliorates the issues. Sorry, I'm just flitting about here. Engagement and partnership. So yeah, just echoing what I just said. And then supervision. I'll come back to supervision. So relationship between the parent. So there's just a couple of issues to identify when thinking about parental peer advocacy, which is around supervision being really critical in terms of supporting advocates in the work that they do. And in the way that a social worker needs supervision, it's the same is true for parental peer advocacy. In fact, it may even be more pressing because they've got kind of background issues that they might be still contending with or trying to work through. And so to support them with that, plus the responsibilities of their role, it's really critical that we provide supervision and appropriate support when for parental advocates. And then the second element was around looking at the relationship between the parent and the advocate. And there's lots of research around the parents feeling like they can much more readily connect with the parent advocate because they live in the same community, they often have a similar background, they speak in a similar way, they're not so professional, it's not confused by jargon. And but that doesn't also, there's a risk that you can automatically assume that the advocate and the parent will just instantly connect. And so it's just bearing in mind that not every parent and advocate is going to immediately click, and so some consideration needs to be given to the specific relationship. And now I'm going to hand over to Sammi, who's going to talk about parental peer advocacy and the study in Camden.
Clive, did you want to introduce the study?
Well, I sort of mentioned it already, but yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. So this was a study we got funded to do from the What Works Centre. When did we do it? I think we started it in August 2021 and it ran till September 2022. Yeah, and it was quite a relatively small study. We've just applied for funding to do a much larger study in England from Nuffield, and we'll find out in June whether we get that, and we're doing a larger study in Wales. But I think, you know, hopefully it's offered some insights, and you know, I think without sounding biased, Camden are very much at the forefront of this work, and yeah. If we go on to the next, I think you're going to do for the next slide, Sammi, is that right?
So yeah, we did a what we call a realist methodology. So essentially, we were looking at sort of the key ingredients of the advocacy service, what parents and professionals sort of were saying they were experiencing with it, and within that, we were looking at sort of the potential impacts, so both positive and negative. The parents and professionals working within the service sort of identified. You okay to go on to the next slide? I'll keep this bit brief, but I guess most people here will know sort of how complex and multifaceted social interventions can be. And I think sort of particularly with this programme, So yeah, we found that parental advocacy sort of has multiple components, involves a range of different people in different contexts. So really understanding the context behind this was important, and this methodology sort of helped us to do that. The process was kind of fairly iterative, so collecting data and building and testing our theory. So essentially looking at why is peer parental advocacy working or not, and who does it work best for. Could you go to the next slide?
And I think this was, sorry to chip in, Sammi, but I do think that this was a critical piece of what was missing in a lot of the literature, because when we reviewed what a lot of the parental advocacy services, a lot of them were based in the USA. So you could see that they could work in some contexts, but also there was different types of parental advocacies. And so it was very difficult to work out what were the kind of what they called causal mechanisms. So what were the specific elements of so for example, in one parental advocacy in a substance misuse, they offer peer advocates as one element of a number of ways of supporting the parent. So it was difficult to attribute all of the outcomes specifically to the advocacy. And so this study was a really critical and I think quite a groundbreaking study in terms of pushing the agenda forward around parental advocacy. Sorry, Sammi, I found it.
That's great. That's a really good point. And we have found, as Clive said, we've got other studies that we're doing. So another one in Wales, and then hopefully, depending on the outcome, one in England, and the context and understanding the mechanisms behind them are really, really important. Thanks for that. Yeah, so it's very much data driven. So we did a lot of field work. We did interviews with social workers, senior managers, parents, advocates. I think there was also some observation of child protection conferences. And then when we had built our theory, we went to discuss it with stakeholder meetings. So this was essentially with the professionals, parents and advocates. So yeah, this was sort of really important to sort of gaining a comprehensive understanding of how and why the programme works so well, particularly in Camden. Can you move to the next slide, please?
I have, sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's a bit slow on my screen, I think. Yeah, so our analysis identified 3 key overarching themes that we think are important to understanding the potential of peer advocacy. So first, we found that all participants had a very, very positive view of parental advocacy, and yeah, felt in all that it was having a very positive impact. And I think this suggested that the intervention itself is not only effective, but is a powerful tool in helping parents to sort of navigate the child protection system. The second key finding or key theme was that we found that parental advocacy seems to improve relationships between parents and social workers, which is again critical for effective child protection work. And I think what's interesting is that our framework sort of shows that advocates with lived experience may be particularly effective, and particularly sort of in building trust and improving relationships. And this is sort of very much down to sort of their first-hand experience of the child protection system and the unique perspective that they bring to the role. And then, yeah, finally, we found that parental advocacy can help to rebalance power relations, so sort of between parents and professionals, and increase parents' agency sort of in the decision-making process. And again, yeah, this is a really important finding. I think it suggests that parental advocacy can help address the power imbalances that often exist, in child protection work. And this theme of power imbalances is something that kept coming back again and again. You okay to do the next one? Thanks. Yeah, so I think these quotes are sort of really powerful, and they capture the essence of the positive impact to that particular theme that the peer advocates sort of were bringing up again and again. So yeah, the first quote there, my advocates changed my relationship with social services. I've learned how to express my way to social workers and how to word it properly. So yeah, this speaks kind of to the importance of effective communication with social workers and how the advocacy programme sort of helped this particular parent to achieve that. The second quote I like, so the advocate's been my rock, and this has made me more comfortable and confident. I know she's there helping and supporting me along the way. And I think this really sort of highlights the vital role of emotional support that the advocate sort of provides. And I think when navigating the child protection system, it's not just about having someone to sort of advocate on your behalf, although obviously this is important. I think it's also having someone who's a source of comfort and confidence along the way as well. As Clive highlighted sort of earlier, it can feel very one-sided. There's a lot of people in the room compared to like 1 or 2 parents. So having that sort of level of support is really, really vital. And then, yeah, the third quote, I think sort of emphasises the significance of parental advocacy in general, and yes, potential to positively impact the lives of many families. And yeah, it just speaks to the broader impact of the programme, not only in Camden, but the sort of the potential for advocacy across the board. Yeah, so one of the key themes that emerged was the role that advocates play sort of in building trust and bridging the gap between parents and professionals. I think this is a critical issue, as trust, I think, is essential for effective communication and collaboration. And unsurprisingly, the parents can struggle to trust in the system and in social workers. So yeah, in this particular study, parents particularly noted the societal stigma, I think that's associated with social services intervention, and how it had been particularly damaging to their trust where children had already been removed from the families. Some noted, particularly like before advocate support, they'd felt hostile towards social services, perhaps found it difficult to work with social services, but also noted really positively that the advocate played an important role in shifting this perception. Yeah, as you can see from these quotes, sort of the parents emphasised the unique perspective and experience that advocates bring to the table. So one advocate said, we could be more inspirational, you know, we've been through this storm, you can encourage them, you can give them more power to help change their attitude from defensive to cooperative. And yeah, this is kind of really looking at how we can shift and how advocacy sort of shifts perceptions of the system to collaboration rather than one of sort of, I guess, paternalism and control. And it comes back to this idea again, I think, of the role of advocates in rebalancing power relations. And so making sure that the parents' voices and wishes and needs are sort of really heard and actually listened to. Can we just go back to the last one? Sorry, I think the last quote is quite interesting there. Yeah, so that one of the senior managers kind of noted that in terms of equalising power, someone who has been there and done it are best perhaps able to do it to the greatest extent. And I think this particular quote, and also from a senior manager, it kind of really speaks to the role of advocates in helping to level the playing field, which again is just really important for parents who feel marginalised or disempowered in their interactions. Thanks, Rich. Yeah, and I think a key goal behind the advocacy programme really is participation. So ensuring that parents can sort of feel meaningfully involved in decision making when involved in children's services. And context is important to this. And there are also sort of lots of different dimensions to context here. So yeah, I think understanding differences in parents' needs and understanding the processes at play there are quite crucial. And this includes sort of understanding cultural differences and sensitivity when working with families from diverse backgrounds. So yeah, this one advocate said that in terms of understanding when you're working with people from a different nationality or culture, you know, understanding where they're coming from, what they're understanding in terms of their cultural norms, and it's highlighting this to professionals who might not be aware. And this just really needs to ensure that parents' needs and wishes are fully listened to in order for them to be able to participate effectively in child protection conferences, and sort of need to understand that holistically the context that's going on behind their involvement. How am I doing for time? Am I good on time?
You're doing good on time. It's 1:45, so we've probably got another several minutes, maybe 10 minutes.
Amazing. So yeah, so what we did with all of the data is we developed what we call sort of a context mechanism outcome, or CMO model even. So this allowed us to sort of dig deeper into the context behind the need for advocacy, sort of what the intervention looks like in practice, and sort of the outcomes that parents and professionals perceive it to produce. So yeah, understanding the context behind child protection involvement, there were positive and negative elements to this. We sort of heard a lot about the negative elements. Professionals and parents sort of emphasised the complexity of the system, the meetings, how sort of like intimidating they can be, the roles, the language, and all of this created quite a sort of overwhelming picture of an oppressive and really quite intimidating system. I should also say this isn't specific to Camden. It's a general perception of child protection services across the board. But we heard from parents that the system can sort of feel inaccessible and overwhelming. And this really helps, like sort of not helps, but creates a power imbalance between sort of parents and social care practitioners, and can make it difficult for parents to engage in the process meaningfully. I think other sort of more negative contextual factors included like the complex position that parents find themselves in. So they often reported feeling like their voices weren't heard, and this is compounded by, as we've had, like the fear of losing children, associated stigma and shame of child protection involvement. On a more positive note, participants sort of emphasised a strong and vibrant sense of community in Camden. And this was really crucial to the success of the advocacy programme and the positive way that it was really embraced. And I think Camden itself sort of is seen quite positively for the way it engages sort of voluntary and community involvement. And yeah, there's a really flexible approach to advocacy and strengths, sort of strong focus on continuity of relationships, which really helped to make, in this particular context, the advocacy service sort of quite successful. Okay, to move to the next. Yeah, so looking at the advocacy programme itself, we identified sort of 3 key stages. So we had pre-involvement, during involvement, and ongoing support. Are you okay to go back one?
Oh, apologies.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'll just give an overview really briefly of these. So the pre-involvement stage is kind of more preparatory stage. So advocates are trained, they supported to complete an accredited qualification, and then there are training opportunities which are ongoing. And then parents are also given the opportunity to opt in, and advocates are matched then based on several sort of different factors. We have the active involvement, so this is where advocates support parents doing child protection meetings, several different elements here, so explaining processes and procedures, providing emotional and practical support, and assisting with communication. So the advocate is there essentially to ensure the parents' voices are heard, and that the wishes and feelings are taken into account. But it isn't just about attending meetings, it's also about facilitating participation and making sure parents just feel really supported throughout the process. And then in the ongoing support phase, the advocate kind of continues to provide support and feedback to parents, and this continues sort of on an ongoing basis until social service intervention ceases. Can we move on, please? Yeah, so I think by understanding the context in Camden, we're able to identify sort of overall 7 key processes that underpin how we think the intervention works. But I think kind of what kind of tells us a bit more about it, what's more interesting is how this was developed into the 4 final mechanisms. So you okay to move to the next one, Rich? Yeah. Could you move to the next one? Is that okay? Yeah, so this essentially outlines the 4 key mechanisms that kind of were the findings of our study. So the first, I think, is the role of active engagement. So the mechanism is all about sort of building trust and collaboration between parents and advocates. So sort of during the preparation stage, as I outlined, the advocates can gain sort of a deep understanding of the challenges that are faced by parents, and also like the value of their lived experience, which can help them to sort of actively engage and collaborate with the parents. The effect of this is essentially increasing the trust in the child protection system. They feel like they have someone on their side and listening to them. And then during active involvement, advocates can sort of help break down complex roles and languages, and they're providing the emotional supports, and parents kind of hopefully are feeling that their wishes and feelings are taken into account. And really with this, it's sort of helping to rebuild, sort of balance the power relations, and the advocates are essentially able to create a more collaborative and positive environment for everyone involved. So if all of the mechanisms, I guess, fire in that, that's the positive outcome that can be achieved. The second mechanism is about effective communication and participation between sort of parents and professionals. So when parents feel heard and when they feel valued, they're more likely to express their wishes and needs honestly. Peer advocates sort of play a crucial role in empowering parents to speak up for themselves, or in some cases where necessary, sort of speaking up for them. And I think the interviews, I think they did, Clive, they highlighted some potential conflict here. So some complexity, I guess, a more negative perception of social workers receiving critiques from parents. But I think this is sort of where rebalancing power relations is really important, because it creates sort of a more open and honest dialogue about this. The third mechanism is building and facilitating trust, and this is really critical to breaking down barriers to participation. So kind of during the pre-involvement stage, advocates demystify the role of social workers and the child protection services. They sort of address any stigma, and this really just helps to create sort of greater understanding and acceptance, improving trust again, and making parents feel that they can actively engage in the process in a safe way. And then, yeah, the fourth mechanism is about sort of supporting the advocates themselves. So as Rich mentioned about the training and supervision being really important, and this can sort of help them feel empowered to use their own experiences to support the parents and to pass on knowledge. So yeah, I think sort of by understanding these four mechanisms, we can see how effective implementation of the advocacy programme in Camden is kind of really driven by building trust, making sure there's effective communication and collaboration between all of the parties. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a scary slide. So this, if you put all of that together, this is what our final logic model looks like. But that essentially just summarises everything that I've said. Clive, is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, I think no, I mean, like you say, that's a long slide. But if you, we've put a copy of the report in the chat, so have a look at the report. A, it's a bigger diagram, and B, we go into it in a lot more depth. But yeah, I mean, I think the Camden context is important in the sense of, you know, Tim and other key people at Camden have spent many years trying to involve parents and families more in decision making at all different levels, including at a strategic level. And I'm particularly interested to know whether, when hopefully we get funding, well, we have got funding in Wales, for example, to look at whether it has such an impact where there isn't that culture. Yeah.
And that was one of the questions in the chat that Donna asked about, you know, whether it could be regionalised, Clive. And I guess there are some efforts being made on a policy level in Wales, aren't there? And it has the issue of parental representation. There's a consultation in English government consultation at the moment on parental representation. So there are sort of on the policy level efforts to ask that question about whether it can work, whether it can be regionalised. Have you got any thoughts about that, Clive?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why it couldn't be regionalised. And you could have I mean, for example, we're talking to colleagues in Ireland. Bernardo's are running a parent advocacy service there. You could have it, you know, a charity leading on an advocacy services somewhere. There's lots of informal networks that go on, parents supporting other parents informally. So I think there's lots of different ways that this can be done on. Yeah.
And
what do you think, Tim, on that question? Because there is always this tension between, because advocacy within a local area and within a local community, from what I can see that you've been able to create, has been like a grassroots from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And what's the risks of trying to nationalise that or develop national guidelines or structures or systems that would?
I mean, it's interesting. People are asking on the chat about sharing the slides and resharing the link to the research, and that would be great if we were able to do that with people over emails that we've got. But it's just yesterday we had a forum with the advocates in Camden, and I used these slides and the research that Clive and Sammi did to talk to them. We've also used these with senior managers as well. And I think when you look at this analysis of the context and the context and also the process of advocacy, people do get it. You know, I think managers get it. People get it in different local authorities. And another question which came through on the chat was about training. And I know we've got Laura with us on the call, and we're doing training and support with Telford local authority at the moment, a very different place. than Camden. I know there are other councils, and Crystal is on the call. She's doing good work in Brighton at the moment. So there are other places in the country and in the UK that are really working hard on getting this going. And I think it makes sense. I agree with Clive that the Child Protection Conference, it's not about preserving that or even enhancing that on its own terms. It's more about mitigating that and the other processes that prevent connection and prevent relational working. I think it can work in other places, and I think we're demonstrating that in some of the learning that we're sharing and the way we're supporting some other local authorities. So if there's anybody on the call that wants to talk to us about supporting them or supporting their local area, then you can get in touch with us. We've put a series of links in the chat, including to our relational activism website, which has got a load of stuff on it about the parent advocacy work and the other things that we're doing. You can also email us as well, and we'll put our email addresses in the chat for you as well. What's your sense, Rich? You just asked that question. There's Claire there from Brian.
I think it's probably you need to probably work with local people who are really invested in and interested and passionate about bringing parental advocacy alive within a local area, within a local community. Because I think it requires something that, because of the statutory nature of our work, is very hard, and the demands on our time and the pressures, it's very hard to do anything that isn't absolutely statutory. And so you need a group of committed and passionate individuals within a local area. So it requires you to form relationships and allies, and then to move into the community and develop relationships with parents. And so I think we've been looking at this a bit, haven't we, Tim, with relational activism and some of the work we've done with Telford, and hopefully some of the work we're going to do with Nottinghamshire around how can you provide a structure and support so that the local people can take control of developing advocacy within their area. And I'd be really hesitant around nationalising that or coming up with, because also it needs to be responsive to the local community and what the parents are feeding back to you. And what they say in Camden is going to be very different to what they say in Bristol compared to Manchester, for example. And parental advocacy, at its heart, is about centering their voices and their perspective and their concerns, and then supporting change in light of what they're identifying. And so if you identify a set of changes, we're going to implement parental advocacy, it almost starts off from the wrong position.
Yeah, and I think Rich is right about finding the allies, reaching out and finding the people around you that share these, both the values and the vision. It's about, to quote Adrienne Brown, it's about moving at the speed of trust and finding those critical connections, those allies. So you're not going to get critical mass straight away. You're not going to necessarily get a nicely formulated process plan and policy with all the edges smoothed, but you can start working on it together with the people in your area that care about it. And be brave, hold a coffee morning, get together in the community, and work from there. Yeah,
and start small.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's 2:00. We're at the end of our hour, and thank you so much to Clive and Sammi. Brilliant as always. Are we able to share those slides, Clive? Is that okay? Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah, send it to anyone. Yeah. I
think the slides are actually very, very useful. We'll get those out to all of you on the list. And look forward to seeing you at future webinars. And thanks for tuning in and support it. We really appreciate it, and it's lovely to see you all.